Pessimism and defeatism are the surest signs or the surest indications that someone is misinformed. It means that they're not actually following, or anyway, not understanding what's happening in the world. I mean, they're probably smart. They probably have intelligence, but their intelligence has been short-circuited by propaganda. Their intelligence has been paralyzed by propaganda. Because being defeatist and being pessimistic means that you know that there are problems, you know what the problems are, and you know who is causing the problems. But you think that the problems can't be solved. And you think that the problem maker can't be stopped. That's what happens when intelligent people are drugged by the narcotic of indoctrination. And just like with drugs, different people have different reactions. Well, intelligent people, moral people, principled people, decent people, they react one way. That's the way they react. They get depressed, they get stressed, they feel despondent. They can see what's wrong, but they can't see any hope of making things better because of the propaganda. And then they take that same approach to activism with that same mindset. They may be activists, they probably are activists, but they're largely being activists just to relieve their own tension, their own stress, to ease their minds in some way. They do symbolic activism, but inside, they feel like they're just shouting at the wind, like they're doing something that's futile. They're activists because of their own moral character, but not out of any realistic expectation of succeeding. Because the propaganda has made them think it's impossible. That's the intelligent person, the decent person on the drug of indoctrination. That's how it usually manifests with them. The unintelligent and the indecent person on the drug of indoctrination just sides with power. They believe in the supremacy of power. And they believe that with power, automatically, it comes with moral legitimacy. So of course, when we're talking about the problem maker, we're talking about America. If you're talking about world politics. So the intelligent person, under the influence of propaganda, knows that America is criminal. They know that America is criminal, but they feel that nothing can ever really change. They feel that nothing will ever truly be done about it. And the idiot, under the influence of propaganda, believes that America is wonderful. He doesn't believe that they're criminal. He believes that they're virtuous, and he believes that anyone and everyone who opposes America must be evil and wicked and tyrannical, and they must hate liberty and justice and goodness and all of those things. And they also believe that no one will ever be able to defeat America. They believe that everyone will be mowed down who opposes the United States of America. That's the unintelligent person. So they're not pessimistic, they're optimistic. They're ignorantly blissful, and they're full of hope, and they're full of pride, and so on. But the intelligent person feels overwhelmed. They feel distressed, and they feel guilty, and they feel pessimistic, and they feel hopeless. So you see, both of them have a different reaction to the drug of propaganda. But what they have in common is they both have the fundamental belief in America's unquestionable, unchallengeable supremacy. And again, just like someone on narcotics, just like someone who's drunk or who's on pills or what have you, just like someone who is intoxicated, someone who is under the influence of propaganda, they can't think straight. Their judgment is impaired. Their discernment is impaired. Their ability to fully comprehend, their ability to think properly, to perceive things properly is crippled. It dulls their analytical skills, and it dulls their observational skills. They can't process information correctly. They can't process information effectively. So the good news is, if you feel depressed, if you're a person who feels depressed, you feel hopeless or what have you, it most likely means that you are an intelligent, moral person. But the bad news is, it also means that you are under the influence of indoctrination and propaganda. And this intellectual and psychological narcotic has impaired your mind. It has impaired your judgment. It has impaired your intelligence. And that's actually what's causing your depression. So let me sober you up. Because the antidote for defeatism, the antidote for hopelessness today in 2025, alhamdulillah, is actually just objectivity. That's all the detox you need. Just a realistic, objective dose of facts. Because the facts prove that your hopelessness your defeatism, and so on, your depression, it's irrational. Your belief that America is too strong, too powerful, too important, too rich, or whatever, that it's too great of a country or what have you to be stopped, that's irrational. It's not fact-based. And in fact, the main place that America still has power is only in your own mind. And that's because the main power that they have ever had was the power of propaganda, the power of, Hollywood, movies, television, and so on. Well, they built a strong narrative about themselves. Yes, they did. It's a very strong and persuasive narrative. They made a picture of themselves as a superhero. They made their whole story, their whole history, a superhero story, a comic book. And the narrative, that story, that propaganda, got pumped into your brain morning, noon, and night your whole lifetime, until America never had to actually be, in reality, America never had to actually be what they made you think it was, because they made you think it was. I mean, they told you already, they taught you. This is a big thing in the West. Perception is reality. That's the first clue. Perception is reality. They grasp that concept very well. But you should know that anyone who says that, anyone who actually believes that, it means that they're never going to actually be what they try to make you think that they are. Because they're not worried about being it. They're just worried about you perceiving them to be it. Do you understand? Anyone who believes that perception is reality is never going to be as worried about reality as they are about the perception. And that's the case with America. They have spent more effort than any nation in history crafting their image, while completely neglecting the substance. America is a perception. America is a perception and not a reality. From George Washington's false teeth to Donald Trump's fake tan. America has always tried to look like what they're not. But here's the reality. America did not become the unipolar global superpower because they defeated everyone else. They defeated everyone else and they rose to a position of supremacy. No, America never won global dominance. It wasn't through superiority. It wasn't through conquest. It wasn't through some grand triumph of strategy or innovation. No, they inherited it by forfeit. After World War II, the European empires collapsed. Britain, France, Germany. They were all too battered and too broken from the war to maintain their grip on power, their grip on the world, their empire. And then by the early 1990s, the only real challenger to America was the Soviet Union, and that imploded under its own dysfunction. The U.S. didn't have to beat anyone to claim the throne. They just stepped in when the previous rulers fell apart. That's not supremacy, that's opportunism. But what did they do once they had this power? They rigged the global economy in their favor. They built an empire not of colonies, but of financial dependencies. The three pillars of America's false power. First, you had the Bretton Woods. In 1944, the United States forced the world to accept the US dollar as the global reserve currency. That meant that every country in the world needed US dollars for international trade. This wasn't because the dollar was superior. It wasn't because American goods were superior. It was because America dictated the rules. The result of that was that the US then could print money without consequences. They could run massive deficits. They could fund endless wars. They could fund their military-industrial complex. And they could still force other nations to hold their currency. The entire global economy became a hostage to the dollar. I mean, we talk about Bretton Woods a lot. Maybe I should sort of explain it, because it's a very good example of what kind of a friend America is to its allies. Truly. They supposedly rescued the world from fascism in World War II. But then they seized upon the weakness and the vulnerability of their own allies by shoving the Bretton Woods Agreement down their throats. It was ruthless. In 1944, at Bretton Woods, it's a place, the United States imposed a financial order that forced all of the other nations in the world into a permanent state of dependence upon the dollar. Those countries didn't agree to it because it was a good deal. Don't misunderstand. They did it because they were left with no alternative, like I said, after the war. See, there's a theme here. You'll see there's a theme to America's dominance. The theme of America's dominance is the absence of alternatives. They only win when there is no competition. You understand? At that time, Europe was destroyed, like I said. Japan was in ruins. China had been devastated. Even Britain, the so-called, British Empire, was bankrupt. The only country that actually emerged from the war, World War II, stronger than before the war was the United States. Well, I mean, all of the other countries were fighting for survival. America's industries were booming. Its economy was thriving. And most importantly, at that time, they held 75% of the world's gold. So what did the US do? They forced the world to use the dollar as the foundation of the global financial system that we know today. Every currency was pegged to the dollar. And the dollar, they said, was to be backed by gold at $35 an ounce. This was a brilliant deception because the United States was essentially saying, we hold the world's gold, so if you want a stable financial system, just trust our money, trust the dollar. And the world was desperate for stability after World War II, and they went along with it. Bretton Woods was sold as a way to prevent economic crises, like the Great Depression. They had just gone through that before the war. It was a way for the U.S. to lock countries into a financial straitjacket, where they could never truly be independent, and it kept fueling the American economy. London had been previously the financial heart of the world, but after Bretton Woods, it was New York. It was New York. The British Empire was dying, and the Americans wanted to inherit its position. You see how they do? It's not by courage, it's by conniving that America extorted their way to power. But let me repeat, the countries didn't eagerly sign up to this system. They had no choice but to sign up to this system. The U.S. controlled the gold, they controlled the loans, they controlled the trade routes, and they had the military power. Again, not because of earned supremacy, but because everyone else had suffered the devastation of World War II. That was the beginning of America's military power, because the war had been fought in Europe and in the Pacific, not in America. The UK got bombed, France got bombed, Russia got bombed, the Netherlands, Belgium, Hungary, Finland, Romania, you name it. Denmark, Spain, Austria, all got bombed. All of them got bombed. And of course, Germany obviously got bombed, Italy got bombed, and Japan not only got bombed, but it had the atomic bombs were dropped on them. Even Egypt got bombed. China, the Philippines, India, even all the way down Australia. Everybody got bombed. Everybody, except America. America didn't get one bomb, except for Pearl Harbor at the beginning, which wasn't officially even part of America at that time. It was a colony. Everybody got wiped out. All their economies were destroyed. Their infrastructure was destroyed, and so on. Manufacturing, everything. And then here comes America, like some ambulance-chasing shyster lawyer to a car wreck on the side of the road, clicking his pen and telling some half-comatose victim of a car crash, just sign on the dotted line. That's what America did after World War II. It's ruthless and predatory. That's your good friend. That's your special friend, Special relationship, special friendship. You thought he was giving you a lifeline, he was actually putting you on a leash. And if you resisted, if Europe resisted, well, you risked economic isolation, financial strangulation. Countries that went against the United States, against their financial interests, you'd find yourself targeted politically, destabilized, or even overthrown. Subversion, everything. All they had to do was call you a communist. If you don't want to go along with America's plan, they just call you a communist. But here's where the real fraud becomes clear. In 1971, as the year I was born, Nixon ended the gold standard. The entire premise of Bretton Woods, the whole idea that the dollar was backed by gold, was a lie. Now the dollar wasn't backed by anything, but it was too late for anyone to pull out of the system by then. So what did that mean? It meant that the U.S. now you don't even have to have gold now, right? So then they could print unlimited amounts of money, and they could impose sanctions against any enemy country. They could weaponize the financial system, and they could exploit the rest of the world without producing anything of real value. This was the beginning of the end of productivity in America, of real productive activity in America. Now, that might sound good in the short term, and it has been very good and profitable for a certain group of people, but it's not sustainable. That's a counterfeit economy. If you have not earned your dominance, if you have not earned your high status, if you have tricked your way into power, if you got into that position by forfeiture of others, well, you won't know how to act, and you won't know how to maintain it. And America hasn't known how to maintain it. You'll be like one of those lottery winners who goes broke a year later after they win the lottery, because you didn't come up right. You didn't come. You weren't raised for this. You didn't work your way to the top. So now their system is collapsing. Countries are waking up to this whole scam. Russia, China, the global south, BRICS, they're all looking for ways to escape the dollar, and they're doing it. And America knows that if the dollar falls, American power falls with it. So understand this: the unipolar world order was not built on American strength. It was built on a rigged financial game, and that game is almost up. When Nixon abandoned the gold standard in the 1970s, the system should have collapsed at that time. But the United States made a deal with Saudi Arabia. The deal was that the Saudis would only sell oil in dollars, the petrodollar. So now every country in the world would need US dollars because every country in the world needs oil. But this was nothing short of economic extortion. It's a racket. It's a mafia-style shakedown on a global scale. And of course, you can't separate this, what America did with Saudi Arabia, you can't separate this from the existence of Israel and America's support for Israel as a destabilizing force in the Middle East. America didn't just offer a deal to Saudi Arabia in the 1970s. No, they backed Saudi Arabia into a corner. And the tool that they used to manufacture that vulnerability, the instrument that ensured that the Gulf states had no choice but to submit to American dictates, was Israel. I mean, let's go back and actually understand that history properly. How Israel was designed to sabotage the region. When the Western powers created Israel, they didn't do it out of some deep sympathy for the Jews after the Holocaust. They didn't care about that at all. They did it because they needed a permanent source of conflict in the Middle East. They needed to ensure that that region could never unify, could never stabilize, and could never emerge as an independent power bloc. Think about it. Before Israel existed, there was no Middle East conflict. But before there was Israel, there was no Middle East conflict. There was no deep-rooted division between the Arab states. That division was manufactured. And after Israel was established, what happened? War, chaos, the rise of revolutionary movements, militant movements, because Arab leaders and their people recognized that their sovereignty was under attack. So then you had Nasserism in Egypt, which emerged as a direct response to Zionism, a direct response to Western imperialism. Then Baathism in Syria and in Iraq. It's for the same reason, to create strong independent states that could resist Israel and Western domination. Israel is at the root of all of this, even communism. And all of this that was going on terrified Saudi Arabia. The monarchy was sitting on a sea of oil, and everyone knew that controlling the oil meant controlling the future. It really meant controlling the world. By the 1970s, America saw their opportunity. They were losing in the war in Vietnam. Their economy was in turmoil. Like I said, when they abandoned the gold standard, that was going to destroy the whole Bretton Woods system. No one was going to need the US dollar if it wasn't tied to gold. So they needed a new system of control. They needed a new way, some other commodity basically to tie the dollar to, and that was oil. But of course they needed the Gulf states to comply. At that time, Saudi Arabia was surrounded by threats. All of them created, fueled, or exacerbated by the existence of Israel. The Arab-Israeli wars had radicalized many people in the region. You had, of course, Nasser and Nasserism, and that was regarded by the Saudis as posing a threat to them. The same way that they see the Ikhwan as posing a threat to them, and what the Ikhwan calls for. The Palestinians had resistance movements. There was so-called terrorism going on. And any of these things could have greatly destabilized the Saudi government. And of course, the Cold War meant that the Soviet Union was ready to support any movement in the Arab world that opposed American-backed rulers, and the Saudis had been backed by the US. So Saudi Arabia was afraid. And the US exploited that fear. They told the Saudis, if you want to keep your government, if you want to remain on the throne, you want protection, okay. This is what America said. Here's the deal. You will only sell oil in US dollars, and in return, we'll make sure that your regime survives. This wasn't a friendly negotiation. This was economic blackmail. America created the conditions of instability through its support for Israel and through its sponsorship of coups and conflicts and assassinations and so on. Then they turned around and presented themselves as the only solution, the only source of stability. So Saudi Arabia didn't feel that they had a choice, and if they had refused, then they would have been isolated. Their assets in Western banks would have been confiscated, as what happened to Iran later. They would have faced a potential CIA coup, just like what happened in Iran in the 1950s, just like in Guatemala, just like in Congo, just like in Indonesia. There could have either been a Soviet-backed or a Western-backed insurgency or overthrow attempt. You know, a possible embargo, economic embargo by the West. So they agreed to the petrodollar deal because, as far as they could see, the alternative was their own destruction. And no, this wasn't because America was so powerful. It was because they were so predatory. This is the difference. They didn't achieve their power by virtue, but by villainy. Like I said before, America only seemed powerful because they were just so ruthless with whatever power they did have. They were so criminal, so psychopathically and so brazenly criminal in their abuse of their power. And that's how the modern global economy was built, not on free markets, not on fair trade, but on coercion, on extortion, on blackmail, on threats. The dollar only remained the global reserve currency because of ensuring that oil, the most critical commodity on earth, especially at that time, that they made sure that it could only be bought and sold in dollars. That meant that every country in the world had to hold dollars in reserve, which meant that they had to also, in order to get those dollars, they had to trade with the US. They had to trade with America, not because they needed to trade with America, not because they wanted to trade with America, but they needed to be able to buy oil. And in order to buy oil, they needed dollars to do that. And how you get the dollars is by trading with America. Demand for the dollar was artificially propped up by the real demand for oil. This system was entirely built on fraud. It's built on force. It's built on the strategic manipulation of conflict. And Israel has been the primary weapon in that conflict. Nothing America does is based on goodwill. Every economic policy, every security agreement, every treaty is always about control. It's always about consolidating their power. They create problems and then they try to sell you the solution. They manufacture instability. They do that. And then they make you pay for protection. It's straight up extortion. This isn't any kind of a partnership. This is a racket. And Israel's at the center of it. A permanent excuse for war. A permanent justification for intervention. A manufactured crisis to keep the Arab world in submission. The petrodollar forced nations in the world to finance America's debt, and it allowed them to weaponize the dollar against their enemies. And this then helped the US to spread its military presence all around the world. See, this is what people have to understand about how this happened. Why there's 800 military bases in more than 80 countries. How did that happen? You know, no other empire in history had such an extensive military footprint. Not the British, not the Romans, nobody. But this isn't because America had conquered all of those places by force. They bought their empire, and it's been bought with the money that they alone can print, because the dollar is the global reserve currency, and every country in the world needs US dollars to buy oil specifically, and to pay their debts, and to function at all. By that time, to function at all in the global financial system, you need dollars. And the United States exploits this dependency. They fund their global military network without limit, unlike other countries. You know, other countries have to actually raise money through production. America doesn't have to do that. They just print more money. They just print money to cover their massive military expenditures because they know it's going to be covered because everyone else is using the dollar. So they can spend trillions and trillions on foreign military bases, endless wars, so-called global policing, without having to earn any of the money that they're using to fund all of that. And then, of course, they can, as I said before, they can weaponize the financial dependence of other countries to pressure them into submission. Any country that resists U.S. military expansion faces the risk of being cut off from the global economy. I mean, this is why so many countries have to tolerate military bases in their lands, because they know that resisting Washington potentially means financial ruin. Anyway, that's the way it's been. Then you have the IMF and the World Bank that helps with that. These two institutions that were created under the Bretton Woods System. They act as instruments of economic imperialism. They have ever since they were founded. They offer loans to struggling countries, but those loans have severe conditions attached. If a nation is in financial distress, the IMF will step in with a bailout, but only if that country agrees to certain reforms. These reforms can often include opening up their markets to corporations, neoliberal program, Western political influence, and allowing U.S. military presence. Many countries that host U.S. bases today only do so because they were financially trapped into submission. Like I said, it's not partnership, it's blackmail. A government that is economically shackled like this cannot afford to oppose U.S. strategic interests. They can't say no when Washington demands that they accept a military base, because rejecting a base, rejecting military cooperation could mean losing access to international financial markets, losing investment, even triggering economic sanctions, economic collapse. That's why you see a pattern. If you look at it, look at the countries that have received major IMF bailouts, International Monetary Fund bailouts. Look at how many of them afterwards, after receiving those bailouts, became either new hosts to U.S. military presence or deepened their military ties with Washington. The United States, as the dominant force in the IMF, decides the terms of relief, decides the terms of the loans, when the debt payments can be delayed or when they can't be delayed, when more funds can be given or not given, when the economic noose will be tightened. All of that is more or less under the hands of the U.S. So when a country is desperate to try to stabilize their economy, the United States will present them with a deal. Accept our military presence in your country, align with our foreign policy, and in return, we will ensure that your financial system doesn't collapse. You see this pattern, this extortion pattern? This is documented throughout history. This isn't an opinion. The Philippines has hosted military bases for decades, U.S. military bases. But they went through multiple rounds of IMF restructuring. And that made them increasingly dependent upon American capital. That's kept them a military asset for the U.S. Same thing with Greece. When they went through the Eurozone crisis, they needed IMF bailouts to survive. And at that time, they suddenly expanded their military agreements with the United States in conjunction with the bailout. And they allowed an American military, an increased military footprint in their country. South Korea is the same. After the Asian financial crisis, they had no choice but to integrate even further than they already were into the military-industrial complex of the United States. So you see the pattern. The same thing applies across Africa, Latin America, and elsewhere. Military bases as a condition for economic stability, so-called. You know, the United States doesn't openly say, if you take an IMF loan, then you have to accept our military. No, they're more sophisticated than that. They're more subtle than that. Instead, they'll say, our military presence will provide stability. You know, they'll frame it as protection because it's a protection racket. They'll say that this is a guarantee for foreign investors that they'll feel safe putting their money into your country. But let's be honest, obviously, the U.S. doesn't protect those countries. They're not there to protect those countries. They're there to subvert those countries and protect their own economic interests. What they're there to protect are the conditions that allow for Western corporations to dominate, to ensure that when any economic crisis hits, the affected country is not going to turn to China or to Russia or to any other alternative, but that they have to stay locked inside the American system. So America became a global hegemon because of the absence of alternatives. And they have only ever been able to maintain their status as a global hegemon by trying to prevent alternatives from emerging. Because their actual power has always been relative power, not absolute power. And the truth is that their global hegemony is insufficient even to contend with regional hegemons when those emerge, or when they even might emerge. And that's what's happening now. As soon as regional hegemons, regional powers emerged, which they have, America has become de facto just another regional power, albeit with significant reach. America is a regional power now. But now even their reach is becoming untenable. This is why countries in the Muslim world, countries in Africa, countries in Asia, and so-called Latin America, all of the countries that are trying to achieve real economic sovereignty are trying to break free from the US dollar, from US dollar dependence. Because as long as the dollar controls the global economy, Washington will continue to blackmail nations into accepting their military presence and accepting subjugation. But de-dollarization is accelerating. The BRICS nations, Russia, China, even US allies are moving away from dollar-based trade. The petrodollar system is breaking. Saudi Arabia is selling oil in other currencies, in the yuan and so on. And they said that they're not renewing this agreement. Countries are building alternative financial systems. They're bypassing SWIFT, setting up their own trade networks. The fact is that America cannot afford endless wars anymore. Iraq, Afghanistan, Ukraine. Each one of these proves that they cannot enforce their will the way they used to. They know that the foundation of their empire, the American empire, they know that the foundation is collapsing. And this is an opportunity for nations to reclaim their sovereignty, for economies to become truly independent, for there to emerge a new, more fair global order. And for all of those people who are still trapped in the delusion of US supremacy, you need to understand this: the world has moved on, and it's time you should too. Because believe me, the power structure in America, the power structure in the West, they don't have these delusions like you. Believe me, none of the people who are in charge in America and in the West generally believe about America what you believe about America. They're in the process right now of trying to manage the transition of America from a global superpower to a regional power. And that's a fact. That's what's happening. They're undertaking the de-empiring of America. And we've seen this before. You should recognize it if you know anything about history. Same thing happened in the United Kingdom back in the 20th century. Like I said, after World War II, they were exhausted. And now today, America is following that same trajectory. And the parallels are undeniable. They're just going about it. The Americans are just going about it in a typically American fashion. They're performing an aggressive retreat, just like some cowboy who's shooting in all directions while running away. After World War II, the UK was drowning in debt. America is drowning in debt. They could not finance their empire anymore. The United States is in the same situation with close to $40 trillion in debt. And like I said, a crumbling industrial base. And the world is increasingly, like I said, rejecting the dollar's dominance. They're in trouble. Washington's ability to fund the military-industrial complex is unsustainable. As the British Empire faded, they withdrew from their colonies, India, Palestine, Suez, Aden, releasing their grip one by one. America's doing the same. They withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021. They're scaling back their presence in the Middle East. They're going to leave Syria. They're struggling to sustain their proxy wars, whether it's in Ukraine or wherever else. Washington is pivoting to the global north now. The Western Hemisphere, Canada, Greenland, Europe, because they know that they can no longer control the whole world as they once did. So they're focusing on their more immediate proximity, recognizing that now they are actually just a regional superpower. So they're just looking at their region. The world is going to be split among spheres of influence. That's what multipolarity really means. It just means a diversity of regional hegemons. And the US is just going to be one of those regional hegemons. They want to control in the global north. When Britain left their empire behind, they tried to maintain some degree of influence, kind of like a hands-off way of influence over the Commonwealth countries. And America's kind of doing the same. They're urging Europe to arm themselves. You know, they want all of their former colonies, their former client states, to take upon themselves their own security burden. Just as the British, the colonies of the British, pushed for independence, now you have the global South. There you have BRICS trying to break free from US control. BRICS is expanding all the time. The Gulf states are rejecting Washington's demands, and they're building alliances with Russia, with China, and so on. Sanctions are being ignored now. The world is moving on. The British Empire was pressured into decolonization because of the changing power dynamics of the 20th century. And now the same thing is happening with the United States, with China, Russia, BRICS, the dismantling of the US-led world order. The dollar is being bypassed. Alternative financial systems are rising. So the power dynamics are changing. Countries are openly rejecting America's dictates. You know, in 1956, the Suez Crisis proved that Britain was no longer a global power. Well, in 2021, the Afghanistan withdrawal proved that America is no longer an uncontested superpower. In fact, almost the entirety of that 20 years. These moments of humiliation aren't just moments of humiliation. They are signals of irreversible decline. And it's decline, in my opinion, that was always programmed into the system all along. And look, when an empire collapses, the people change. They go into like an identity crisis. The British did. Because what are we supposed to be? Who are we? What do we stand for, if not global domination? And Americans are facing the same question now. And that's why you've got a Donald Trump. You know, they have fatigue after all the endless wars. The American people are questioning why they're supposed to, bear the economic burden of so-called global policing. You have the rise of populism, isolationism, economic nationalism. These are all signals of a society that is withdrawing from its imperial ambitions. And they're grasping for new self-definitions. They need some new identity that will still satisfy their nationalistic egos. The key difference between Britain's decline and America's decline is this. Britain had America to take its place. America has no successor, at least not in terms of states. There's no other Western power that's going to take over. Instead of a single Western power taking over, we're entering a multipolar world. China, Russia, regional blocs are filling that vacuum. And I've said many times that transition is going to be chaotic. America is trying to manage their decline and to retreat strategically while maintaining some level of influence wherever they can. But history tells us that the decline of an empire is never smooth, but nor is it reversible. What I see, and I've talked about many times, is that the a-national owners and controllers of global financialized capital basically represent an evolution of unipolarity, an evolution of imperialism into the realm of the private sector power. But it's probably kind of an exaggeration to say that they are the unipolar superpower. I mean, they are absolutely a global superpower, but they're also very limited by regional state powers and by spheres of influence and by blocks that are created around those states, regional hegemons, for the simple reason that China, for example, Russia, and the Muslim world generally, in those countries, business is in the hands of the ruler, not the other way around, not like in America. And the rulers in those countries are not about to let private sector power ever eclipse their own authority. So now let's bring it back around to the pessimism and defeatism issue. I hope you can see that it's irrational today to be defeatist, to be pessimistic. For the Muslim world, for the global South, for all of the nations that have been under the shadow of American hegemony, wallahi, this is the moment to break free. The structures that have chained the world to Washington's dominance, those structures are crumbling. The future belongs to those who can navigate this transition. This is very important. And who can build alliances, who can establish sovereignty, ideally collective sovereignty, in the post-American order. You know, you've heard the term Pax Americana. Well, we're in post-Americana. And if you don't understand that, if you still operate within the obsolete paradigm of American supremacy, so-called, then you might be too timid, wrongfully timid, to seize the opportunities that are emerging. You might actually fall for America's bluffs and America's bluster. I mean, like, take South Africa right now, for example. Right now, the U.S. is taking a very hostile stance towards South Africa. They're claiming that South Africans are dispossessing white farmers, Afrikaners, of their land. So they're imposing sanctions and they're freezing aid. Okay. Let's talk radical realism here. In my opinion, the people of South Africa, for the people of South Africa, the time has come for clarity, for decisive action, and for radical realism. We have spent too long foolishly believing that fairness can ever be expected from those people in the West who have built their dominance on exploitation. No, enough is enough. The United States believes that it can sanction South Africa into submission. They believe that they can dictate your policies. They believe that they can bully you into compliance. But in my opinion, they have miscalculated, and they have miscalculated badly. They believe that they hold all the power, but that's a lie. South Africa is not weak. And you shouldn't act like you are. You control critical minerals, resources without which their industries, their military, their so-called green energy transition, all of that will stall. If they want economic warfare, then let them know that without South Africa, their technological and military ambitions collapse. This isn't just empty rhetoric. This is reality, and sometimes you need to be told what reality is. What about South Africa's ports? I mean, do they think that the global trade routes that they depend on are untouchable, America? South Africa holds the key to vital shipping lanes. South Africa is a gateway to global trade. If America attempts to cripple you in South Africa, you remind them that you can disrupt their supply chains. You can forge new alliances throughout BRICS and throughout Africa, and you can make them feel the consequences of their aggression. Yes, you can. And to anyone in South Africa who says that you need their markets, you need their investments, and so on, dependency is a choice in 2025. You don't have to be shackled to that system, a system that was only ever designed to keep you weak. You have alternative partners today. You have natural wealth, alhamdulillah. You have the strength and you have the position to dictate your own economic future. Yes, you do. I'm telling you that this is America shooting in the air while they are retreating. If you stand up to them, they will stand down. Obviously, American sanctions aren't about justice, they're about control. That's always been the case. Their aid is not generosity, it's leverage, always. They make that very clear. Their partnerships are not built on respect, they are built on the expectation that you will always remain subordinate. They think that you're going to sit back and let them try to cripple you, but I think you should prove them wrong. If they sanction your industries, nationalize theirs. If they try to isolate you, then you lead the charge in de-dollarization. If they try to break you, then forge stronger bonds with those who share your vision in the global south. This is radical realism. This is not idealism. This is not emotionalism. It's the simple, inescapable truth of power. The truth of power is that it must be met with power. So I would say to the people of South Africa, enough is enough. The time of compromise is over for everyone in the global south. The time for action has come. And you need to understand that one of the reasons, this is the reality, one of the reasons for them freezing that aid is exactly what I've been talking about. America is withdrawing. So don't you dare beg for that aid. Don't beg for them to give you that aid. Don't argue for it. Don't try to clear your name from the lies that they're using to try to justify freezing that aid so that they'll unfreeze it. They're freezing it because they can't afford it. It's got nothing to do with you. Don't believe the hype. They're not freezing it because of anything you're doing with farmers. They're freezing the aid money because they need the money and because they're in retreat from imperial maintenance. And they're sanctioning you for the same reason. Because the A National OCGFC want business to go elsewhere. They want Global South business to go elsewhere. You know, all the places that America is freezing aid, because South Africa is not the only one. All the countries where they're freezing aid, well, they're just opening up opportunities for China. They're opening up opportunities for Russia and for BRICS, for South-South economic relationships, South-South economic partnerships, for those relationships and those partnerships to expand and to flourish. They're sanctioning it not to hurt you. They're sanctioning to dismantle the American economic ties with the rest of the world. That's actually what they're doing. And they're doing it everywhere. They're doing it all over the place. It's not just you. But if you still have that old idea about America in your mind, then you might think that you need to acquiesce. You might think that you need to surrender. But we're living at a time when that sort of timidity is no longer pragmatic. No, you shouldn't capitulate. You should retaliate. South Africa, like every other country in the global South, has economic leverage. You have economic weapons that you never dared to use before because you were afraid of what the U.S. would do in response if you used them. But I'm telling you, they only could make you fear their response because, again, for 30 years, there was no alternative to the United States. So no one could afford alienating them. No one could afford angering them. Because we all know that they don't act justly. We all know that they don't act fairly. You know, they have unearned power. They have unearned wealth. They have unearned influence. And no one knows how to properly or responsibly act with something that they didn't work for, that they didn't earn. So everyone knew that the U.S. would absolutely abuse their power if you ever did anything to upset them. But that's not the case anymore. That's not the case in 2025. There are alternatives now. And those alternatives, like say China or Russia or Saudi Arabia and so forth, they earned their power, they earned their influence, and through that earning process, that came together with a learning process. So these countries are wiser, they're more mature, they're more responsible. And America, you'll see, America gets awkward when those countries enter the room. And you know what I'm talking about. You know, it's like those videos you see when some fake martial arts teacher unfortunately finds himself in the ring with an actual MMA fighter. Well, he gets very uncomfortable. Again, the reality is that America today comprises a fraction of global GDP compared to what they did in the 1960s. You don't have the biggest army. You don't have the biggest navy. You're not building ships. You're not building missiles at the same rate that the Chinese are. You can't recruit anymore. No one wants to put on your uniforms. Even your high-tech weaponry depends on rare earths from China and, yes, from South Africa. The ratio of success versus failure of your covert operations and your regime change projects in the last 20 years has been dismal. American exports represent less than 2% of global GDP. No one needs your goods. And after Gaza, nobody wants them. The brand value of your brands, of your companies, has absolutely tanked. There's a buy local movement across the global South. Meanwhile, you, the United States, are running a trade deficit every year of about $1 trillion. You don't have the manufacturing capacity to try to replace any imports through domestic production. Even your agriculture sector is in annual deficit of $16 billion. Truth be told, even your tech sector, if we're telling the truth, is basically not domestic, but imported through immigration. So how are you going to threaten anyone? How is America supposed to threaten anyone with sanctions when your whole economy needs the world more than the world needs your economy? You can't sanction anyone. That's why they don't work anymore. Wallahi, as an empire, you aged very fast. And you aged very badly. It's rather stunning. So in my opinion, countries around the world ought to act like you're not even here anymore. Like America's not even here anymore. No one should be counting on your aid. No one should be counting on your financial aid, your assistance. No one should be looking for your investment, trying to solicit your investment. And no one should be selling to your market. No. How are you going to act hostile and how are you going to act aggressive and still expect to have access to our products? have access to our resources, have access to our expertise in the global south. If you want to put tariffs on what we export to you, then okay, you buy our exports in our money, and your merchants can pay for that tariff in dollars. How about that? I mean, if you don't want to play nice, and you think that everyone is going to still just coddle you while you're throwing a tantrum, well, you might just get the response that you deserve. And then maybe you'll learn to behave yourself. Because we are entering the era of America's humbling. We're entering the era when that big parade float called America gets deflated. And I'm telling you, the history that's going to be written about that country, the history that's going to get written in, say, 30 years or maybe 50 years from now, well, that history is going to be scathing. Because there has never been a more fake, a more fraudulent, a more hypocritical, a more belligerent, or a more unqualified empire than America. And if you ever want to be great, I mean, forget about being great again. If you ever want to be great, then America is going to have to be humbled first. It's going to have to be completely stripped of all the lies, of all the filters, of all the propaganda, and then maybe you can start doing the work, the real work of a civilization to become great, to become that great nation that you have pretended to be all this time. But until that maybe comes, well, the rest of the world is going to have to deal with you according to the way that you really are. So let all of the intelligent people, all of the moral people, the Muslims and non-Muslims, they should all feel optimistic today. Because like I said, being optimistic in 2025 does not mean being idealistic. It means being realistic. No, you don't have to be an idealist in 2025 to be optimistic. You just have to be realist. Because wallahi, the slave master has become old and weak and senile, and he is holed up in his room at this point, and the plantation is ours.